Last night,
I was the
two
kid.
divine beings descended upon me in a vision, and they commanded me to do their holy bidding. So basically they need me to cram this fuzzy little Glep keychain into Skyrim? Could be easy, right? So Skyrim, outside of maybe Minecraft, is probably the most modded game in existence, right? By that logic, you'd assume modding it isn't too complicated, and that there are plenty of guides to hold your trembling little baby hands through the process. What are you, dumb? A big knuckle-dragging buffoon? A peon? Okay, let's roll it back. During my research, I found loads of guides, old Nexus forum posts, YouTube tutorials, but as I learned the hard way, 99% of them are very outdated. Most of them are the original Skyrim, which uses a completely different mesh structure, and even when I followed the video guides to the letter, I still ended up at roadblocks so severe that no amount of Google Foo could save me. There were some helpful videos, but most were over an hour long, and there's not enough Adderall in the world to help me get through that, so obviously I took the healthy approach, piecing together my workflow from snarky Reddit comments and highly suspicious furry forums that I just know have put me on some kind of government watch list. So my holy quest began. I opened up the 3D sculpt I originally made for my Glep keychain in ZBrush, and after consulting my handsy spirit guides, determined that the best way to lore accurately implement this little spit goblin was to tie him to a stick. After giving Glep the Shibari treatment, I exported the whole model as a .obj for Blender. Now, this might upset a lot of people, but please understand, guys, before the troubles began to befall upon me, I originally intended this to be a super speedy little project. But yes, rather than being the good Christian boy I should be and retopping by hand, I used an auto-retopology tool. Please, forgive me. If I weren't such a creature of habit, I would have done the UV unwrap in Blender. However, I've been unwrapping in the same outdated 3D coat version for the past 8 years, so that's not changing anytime soon. Despite all the crashes. Since I'm going to paint this whole thing up in Substance Painter, I used Marmoset Toolbag to bake all the necessary maps, to use all its quick cheaty texture filters and generators. If I could see into the future, I'd know right now to follow Skyrim's texture conventions and export the model's colour or albedo texture with the opacity map thrown into the alpha channel. But after hearing me refer to Starfield as Starfail, the angel began to forsake me.
Who's laughing now? Yes, I was in the chess club.
Maps in hand, I use the aforementioned black magic in Substance Painter to get a super speedy paint job on the little green man. After getting all broody and remorseful about not just modelling the ropes myself instead of using a rough looking image texture, I get over myself and begin learning how to rim my sky. So, following along with a tutorial, I installed an old version of Blender 3.6. As the plugin they recommended to import and export Skyrim model files, aka .nifs, hasn't been updated in years and is incompatible with anything more recent. Now, don't make my mistake. NifTools, as it turns out, is mostly incapable of exporting model files for Skyrim Special Edition, especially when they're rigged, and even if you export for the original Legendary Edition and use a program to convert it, it's highly liable to crash the Creation Kit and make you punch holes in your desk. No, speaking from experience. Instead, you could install Blender 4.3 and grab the PyNifly plugin, which works way better. So, I use a plugin to export the NIF file and then open it in a program called Nifskope. Because I'm not blessed with an angel's intellect and have zero clue what half these nodes and gizmos on Skyrim model files even do, I do know that them being set up perfectly is integral to getting them to work in game, regardless. So the easiest way to do this is to use a tool like Bethesda Archive Extractor to extract the mesh file of a similar type of weapon from the game and import that into a new Nifskope window. Then I can select the BS Tri-Shape node for the Glep model, right-click it, go to Block and select Copy. Then I flip over to the window with the weapon reference, right-click on the Tri-Shape node for the main body of the weapon and select Block, Paste Over. This way you effectively steal all the precious data from the original weapon, but parasitically infect it with the Glep strain. We now just need to reattach the BS Lighting shader property that just got dislodged by copying and pasting it over. We can then delete the extra tri-shaped nodes and that loose BS lighting shader property and BS shader texture set. Say all those words quick. Then it's ready to export. At this point we need the textures in Skyrim's native .dds format, so we'll need a tool like Blender DDS add-on to export the texture files. Generally, you'll need the colour, normal and specular textures. When making Glep I was very dumb and for some reason thought the specular map had to be packed into the normal map's alpha channel and struggled to understand why it wasn't working despite there being a very, very obvious specular map input in the next step. So fair warning, Glep will be a little flat. Sorry. With its textures exported, I open textures inside the data folder of the Skyrim installation directory and throw them into a new folder. Then we can open a program called Outfit Studio and import our Glep stick we just exported from Nifskope. If we double click the model name in the Mesh tab, we can add a material and then import our textures into it. Here we paste in the file path for each texture into the relevant field and our Gleppy should be all painted up. He's a bit too moist though, so we need to pump up that specular value just a little. To get rid of that black border around the ropes, we just need to enable the transparency in the material settings. Now we can import the same reference file we used earlier to copy the scaling and orientation of a weapon. Holding right click highlights a dot where the player will hold the weapon to, which helps a lot with getting the placement right. Okay, now it's scaled. We can export it. We can either do this directly to or just copy the file over to the meshes directory of the data folder, in the folder with the same title as the one containing the textures. Now it's time to open up the Skyrim Creation Kit. Click open and check the skyrim.esm file and hit OK. After a brief wait and a whole dossier of error messages you can ignore, we're ready to make Glep real! I search up the name of a pre-existing weapon, in this case the Ebony Warhammer, and look for both the static and weapon form. First things first, I'll open them up one by one and rename them. When you click OK, it'll ask you if you want to make a new form, and yes we do. Now we can check the Show Edited Forms Only box and it'll only show our fresh new weapon files. Time to replace the model with our little spitty man. First I open the static form and click the Edit button next to Model. Then I search for the model file in the directory we exported and open them up. If everything worked correctly, you should see your object in the little window right now. Honestly, with how many troubles I've had figuring out this process, it still feels like a miracle when there's actually something there. We can now hit OK and move on to the weapon form. In case you're wondering why I'm just adding video to at the end of the ID and name here, it's because I already have one version of the weapon in the game, and I'm just trying to differentiate the two. You just ignore it, please. Here we can edit all the weapon stats such as the weight, damage, and whether it's two-handed on. We're going to leave this as the original values and hop on over to Art and Sound. For the first person model object, we're going to select the name of a static form we just made and then repeat the previous model selection process in the model selection. You can also create a crafting recipe for your weapon or a spawn location, but I'm lazy and we're going to skip that, so just go ahead with saving our mod. The mod file saved, we can go into our mod manager of choice, I'm using Vortex, and make sure our fresh mod is enabled. Alright, moment of truth. Let's fire up that rim! To make things easier for testing purposes and to skip picking a spawn location, I use a mod called Modex? I don't know, but anyway, I use this to let me search through all the in-game files and pop that sucker in my inventory. Already a good sign that we can see the weapon listed. And there it is! It worked! Alright, so you'd think this is where I'd pack it up and call it a day, right? Wrong! Because that's when something came over me, a compulsion to let my narcissism run wild and inject one of my own original OC please do not steal creations into the game too. Enter this guy. Hello. The dashing fella who serves as a current Fanatoys Company logo despite being well and truly usurped by yours truly. Before I went down the path of being a virtual kind of dude, I actually designed the helmet as a 3D printable prop to be worn whenever I'd show up in videos. However, I may have horrifically misjudged how uncomfortable it is to wear, and how dumb and muffled it sounds to be screaming at the camera through layers of plastic teeth. But that's not such an issue if we're making our players suffer instead. However, I had plenty of suffering of my own to endure after I'd discovered the folly of my belief that importing an armor asset would be just as simple as the Glep stick, and I wouldn't have to waste another 6 hours figuring out a functional workflow. What a fool I was. So before we get to any of the rimming action, we've got to transform this 3D printable object into a game model. I basically followed the exact same process I performed on the Glep stick, although I added a few extras like little wires that existed on the real world helmet to keep all the segments strapped together. I also modified the structure of the helmet slightly to make sure no areas that were previously unseen wouldn't be horribly clean. After a quick and messy auto retop, please don't crucify me, I brought the new low poly version into 3D code for retopology, and after exporting it, did all the map baking in Marmoset toolbar. Just like Glep, I used a bunch of modified versions of Substance Painter's built-in smart materials, as well as some of my own to quickly retexture the helmet. It was around here that after attempting to once again pack it into the normal map's alpha channel, I learned that the specular map should actually be exported separately, so the helmet at least was spared from a very flat texture fate that befell Glep. So with the model complete and ready, we need to get it Skyrim ready. Now, unlike a weapon, an armor piece has to be rigged up to the player character's skeleton. Using the BSA Extractor program, I ripped all the parts of a male player model, though really here we only actually need the head, and imported them one by one into Blender. Most parts of a player have a _0 and a _1 file, 0 being a skinny Skyrim character and 1 being a big beefy fella. And having a version of your armor for each body type with the same naming convention is necessary to have your armor fit the character's body correctly regardless of their physique. You also need to rescale and rename your files to fit the female body if you're intending on making women's armor too. However, we're just making a piece to fit the male head, and there's only 1 file reference for that rather than 2. Nice. I moved around and scaled up the helmet to fit the big fella's bald dome. Now, we need to actually skin our helmet to the character rig to ensure it moves and deforms with the body correctly. We can get an easy start with this by clicking our head and then shift-clicking the helmet, switching to weight painter mode, hitting the weights tab and then selecting transfer weights. Now if we leave it like this, the jaw of our helmet is going to slightly wriggle around with a movement of our character's neck, so to avoid breaking the illusion of it being a solid hunk of metal, we can use Blender's weight paint brush to make sure everything is nice and red and weighted even. I also delete a bunch of polys off the character's head that won't be visible under the big dumb helmet. Probably not the most necessary step with the amount of polys we're going crazy with on the helmet model, but I did it anyway. I delete all the unnecessary body files I brought in for reference along with anything else in the scene like the camera and lights, and hit Ctrl A and export the file as a .NIF for Skyrim Special Edition. Now, I don't even want to tell you how many failed attempts I made here attempting to follow sprinklings of advice online all the way from being told to work on and export my files as Legendary Edition models instead and convert them later to mangling the file structures in Nifskope. All of these solutions either ended up with big broken Brachiosaurus necks or straight up crashing the Creation Kit before I figured out going way simpler, funnily enough, worked out way better. So we can actually take our .NIF files straight to Outfit Studio, where we can set up our material and textures just like we did for the weapon. Of course, you should also add your converted .dds texture files to the textures folder, just like with the Glep stick. I also tweaked specular values to a nice sweet spot for the helmet surface and export that sucker out of Outfit Studio. Now, after putting our new .NIF file in the Skyrim Meshes folder, cracking out the Creation Kit and loading up the Skyrim.esm file just like before, we can search for an already existing helmet armor form, rename it, hit OK, and hit Yes on the Create New to create a copy. Now we can open our new form, tweak the details to our liking, and then double-click the helmet name entry under the model section to open up the associated armor add-on form. This is where the actual model information of our armor piece is stored. Again, just like before, we can change the ID to the name of our regular armor form plus AA in the title, hit OK and Yes to create a fresh new armor add-on. Now let's reopen our new armor add-on and add our armor file. In the mail section, we just hit the select button next to biped model, click edit and search for our file. It's a miracle! Our boy is right there. Now we hit OK and OK again. Time to export. Just like with the Glep stick, we just go with the default and export it to the Skyrim data directory. an ableite.esp file in our mod loader of choice and fire up that rim. And the final result? I hope you guys enjoyed tagging along on my holy quest, and if it gave you a little helpful nudge towards modding the game without ripping all the hairs out of your dome, please drop me a like. Bit of a different video to my usual fare, but I'll be back to 3D printing nonsense very soon. Feel free to drop me a fiendish little sub if you're interested, and of course, you can find all my available trinkets in the link down below. Catch you later!